Today, I'd like to bring you a bit of an educational piece. Today, we're going to cover the basic details of how our Canadian federal government works. We'll cover the upper chamber, known as the Senate, the lower chamber, known as the House of Commons, how representatives of each body get their positions, what each one does, how the Queen works into this whole mess, and the process of passing a bill through Parliament into law. So hold on to your toques, folks, as we jump into the halls of the Parliament of Canada. Alrighty, so the Parliament of Canada is broken up into three distinct bodies. The lower chamber, or as it is more commonly referred to, the House of Commons, the upper chamber, known more commonly as the Senate, and finally, Her Majesty and Head of State, the Queen of England. Yes, folks, she is, for all intents and purposes, a third body of Parliament.
Hey, fancy the Queen.
Yes, fancy the Queen indeed. Anyway, the Senate and the House of Commons together create the bills and propose them to the Queen, and the Queen, through the Governor-General, pass those bills into law. First, we're going to cover how each of these bodies are populated and what they do, or at least what they're supposed to do. For the sake of clarity, I'll refer to the lower chamber as either the House of Commons or simply the House. I'll refer to the upper chamber as the Senate, and Her Majesty the Queen as quite simply the Queen, or perhaps Queenie, depending on how I feel at the moment. Once we cover that, we'll talk a bit about our electoral process, and then finally I'll walk us through the process of a bill being proposed and then entered into law. We shall start with the House. The House of Commons was first assembled in Canada in 1867, when the original provinces of Canada, now Ontario and Quebec, New Brunswick, and Nova Scotia, passed the British North America Act, creating the Dominion of Canada. Basically, long story short, the Canuck political elite of the time saw the bloodiness of the American War weaken provincial powers. They thought the autonomy and power of individual states in America was bad. Anyway, c'est la vie. By 1931, the Statute of Westminster was passed, and we got to make our own rules without the Brits interfering too much, except for changes to the Constitution and the British North America Act, which they still had full authority over. That changed in 1949 when we got limited power to change our constitution, and finally, full autonomy was achieved in 1982 when the Canada Act was passed. For all intents and purposes, the British could not affect laws that would impact Canada, and full constitutional authority was transferred to us. But that's kind of a tangent. We'll get to that maybe some other day. The House of Commons in today's world is made up of members of Parliament, or MPs, all duly elected to their position via federal elections called not more than every 4 years. There's currently 308 seats in the House, with each province getting a number of MPs in proportion to their population as dictated by the census. At current, Ontario has the most at 106 seats, Quebec is next with 75, followed by British Columbia with 36, Alberta with 28, Manitoba and Saskatchewan with 14 each, Nova Scotia, home to some of the nicest people anywhere, by the way, with 11. New Brunswick has 10. Newfoundland and Labrador have 7. PEI has 4. And each of the territories, Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, each have a single seat. Collectively, these 308 individuals make up the House of Commons. Once the House of Commons is elected, the governing party is decided by looking at which party has the most seats. So, for example, every MP runs for their seat under the auspice of one of the federal parties or as an independent within their home riding. The official parties of Canada are the Conservatives, the New Democratic Party, the Liberals, and the Bloc Québécois. In our latest election, the Conservatives took 166 seats, the NDP took 103, the Liberals took 34, the Bloc Québécois took 4, and the Green Party, an unofficial Canadian party, took a single seat. Since the Conservatives took the most seats, they were given the mandate to govern, and the head of their party, Stephen Harper, became Prime Minister. Now, it's important to note that they got the mandate because they had the most seats. Since Canada functions under a multi-party system, a majority of seats is not required to govern. It happens that the Conservatives had a majority this time, but it's not necessary. With the Prime Minister selected, he can now set to work putting together his cabinet. The cabinet consists of MPs that the Prime Minister selects to be his various ministers, 39 in total. Yeah, we have a bit of a bloated political system too. It's kind of sad. But with all those positions filled, the House of Commons is formed, the Prime Minister is elected, and the Cabinet is ready to do the business of government. Important notes, just to sum up. Canada does not vote directly for their Prime Minister. They vote for their local MP. My hometown of Hamilton is split into 3 ridings, so 3 MPs come from Hamilton, just to give you an idea. The MPs are re-elected every time a federal election is called, and the Prime Minister is also an MP for a local riding. So it's possible that the leader of an official party might not win his local seat in the federal election. When this happens, aside from being really awkward, the party will usually parachute the leader of the party into a riding they did win, to try to mitigate the awkwardness. So it's possible that the candidate you voted for is not the one you get, though it will be someone from that party. This is pretty rare, though. Usually party leaders win their ridings very easily, and when they don't, it's very embarrassing for everybody. So that's the House of Commons. God bless it. Next is the Senate, as controversial as it is. The history of the Senate follows the same timeline as the House of Commons, but it's possessed of some rather fun attributes. First off, senators in Canada are all appointed by the sitting Prime Minister, but they're only appointed when the seat comes up. It used to be that once an individual was appointed to the Senate, that they were appointed for life. But nowadays, they can't serve on the Senate once they exceed the age of 75. The original qualifications are pretty interesting, though, especially since we still use them. They were laid out in the Constitution Act of 1867. So in short, you need to be one of the wealthy social elite of Canada. It's kind of crazy, right? There's a financial requirement on being a senator. When adjusted for inflation, that amounts to about $175,000 worth of property and the same amount of cash. In modern times, this has never really been an issue, save for one nun that had taken a vow of poverty before becoming a senator. She got in, church signed over land into her name, it all worked out. But the intent behind this was to have a chamber of quote-unquote sober second thought to any heated legislation put forward by the House. You see, us poor rabble tend to get heated and excited over things, and we need rich folks to temper us with cool heads. But all joking aside, the Senate has historically proved to be able to provide this, rarely getting involved in politics and usually handling the minutiae of bills put before them. Senators are usually politicians of some experience, former ministers and the like, and the occasional hard-nosed businessman. There's a big push right now to have the senators become elected positions, though. And in fact, Alberta elects senators in waiting, which they put forward to the Prime Minister for consideration. He's under no legal burden to consider these, let alone appoint them, but the public pressure is considerable, and one of them has in fact been appointed to Senate from that list. The current Senate is comprised of 105 seats. They're not proportional to the population like the House is. Ontario and Quebec each have 24. BC, Alberta, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador each have 6. Nova Scotia and New Brunswick each have 10. PEI has 4, and the territories again each have 1. So that's the Senate. Finally, there's the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen of England.
And the Queen is too severe. You know, the glasses get bigger and bigger and bigger. She's becoming an owl. Her glasses will be bigger than her body at some point. And then she will light fires everywhere.
She's still, for all intents and purposes, the head of state in Canada, but most of the power she has over us has been put into other powers within the Canadian government. That being said, there are certain things the Queen still must do, and those things are handled through her representative in Canada, the Governor-General. The Governor-General is, in theory, appointed by the Queen to represent her interests in Canada. In practice, it's not quite so dictatorial. In practice, when the Governor-General's term expires, every 5 years, the sitting Prime Minister makes a recommendation to the Queen, which she accepts and appoints. The Governor-General is useful in that they handle much of the ceremonial business of the head of state. They hand out medals to our honored soldiers, they attend banquets and ceremonies that Canada is invited to, but most importantly, they do 2 things. One, they have the ability to dissolve Parliament and invest the power of leadership into another representative. So when you hear all this talk about coalition governments in Canada, that's basically what they're talking about doing, is going to the Governor-General and asking her to dissolve Parliament and invest in them the mandate to lead. The second thing that the Governor-General does, which is very important, is sign bills into laws. Basically, without the sign-off of the Queen, through the Governor-General, no bill in Canada can be passed into law. This process is known as royal assent. If a bill does not receive royal assent, it fails. End of sentence. That's about right. Fortunately, bills that pass the rest of the parliamentary process always get royal assent. So while the potential is still there for the Queen to step in, the likeliness is very, very slim. Speaking of the parliamentary process, though, that brings us to our next point, which is how bills get passed in Canada. So all of this stuff is basically a real complicated way to pass legislation in Canada. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about. The House of Commons, the Senate, the Queen, it's all about laws. Well, the laws and money, but mostly laws. So here's the process in a nutshell. Step 1. Some poor sod gets it in his head to pass a bill being a draft of a law. The important thing here is whether or not that sod was a cabinet minister or just a member or senator. If it's a cabinet minister, then the bill becomes a government bill. If it's anyone else, then it's a private member's bill. The differences are minimal. All bills will have to go through the same parliamentary process, but one major difference does exist, and that's money. The bill would require part of the public revenue. It must be a government bill and have a royal recommendation, i.e. a recommendation from the Governor General. So they basically have to say yes before the law goes in, and then say yes at the end.
Hey, fancy the Queen.
Yes, fancy the Queen. For this example, though, we'll assume that the Prime Minister and the Cabinet were the ones proposing the bill. This is the way bills usually become laws, after all. Usually it's the government putting them forward. So, next step. Step 2. Once the bill is crafted by the Cabinet, they propose the bill to the House of Commons. The proposal is then voted on by the House. Basically, the Prime Minister and Cabinet say, hey, we want to do this thing. And the House goes, that thing is stupid. Or alternatively, yes, that is a good thing. Tell me more. Assuming the bill passes this initial vote, and it usually does when it's a government bill, then it goes to committee. Step 3. Alright, so committee is basically a bunch of specialized politicians. There's a boatload of committees out there, all with a special focus. There's a committee on agriculture, a committee on economics, a committee on agenda and procedure, on fisheries and oceans, on the environment, on government operations and estimates. You name it, there's a committee for it. Once the bill gets past committee, usually with more than a few changes, it goes back to the House of Commons. Okay? Step 4. The House of Commons then takes the bill, now drafted and reviewed by the committee, and debates the bill, which you can check out on CPAC. This is usually filled with all sorts of discussion, debate, and hollering back and forth. Canadians want to know if the Honourable so-and-so has considered how terrible this idea is, because it's going to cost us a lot, even by the Honourable so-and-so's rather spend-easy policies. It's real good stuff. You should watch it sometime. In any case, the bill is either voted through or it's voted down. If it's voted through, then it goes to the next stage. Step 5. Senate approval. So, the bill, now having been approved by the House of Commons twice and passing through a House committee, is ready to be reviewed by the Senate. Generally, this step is very quick. The senators review the bill, check that the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, and then if all goes well, and it usually does, then the bill is passed to the Governor General for Step 6, Royal Assent. Alrighty, so 4 past votes from over 400 people, and it all comes down to this. 1 Governor General, 1 bill. In a show-off of epic proportions, will the bill persuade the mighty Governor General of its merit? Will thousands of hours of overpaid government employees be for naught? Or will the bill get that golden treasure, that precious prize, 1 royal signature? I'm not going to lie, it's not as dramatic as that. It gets a signature. It always gets a signature. It's really just a formality. The Governor General signs off on it, and ta-da, we have a new law. And that, my friends, is the functioning of Canadian government in a nutshell. It's a lot like Go. It can take 5 or 10 minutes to learn, but a lifetime to really fully understand and master the process. Hopefully now, though, you understand it just a little bit better, how this great country of ours is managed. If you have any other questions about it, feel free to shoot me an email, or just come check us out at the Freedom Reformation Movement. We're always talking about government or some other crazy thing. This was Lino. Thanks for tuning in. You have yourself a good day.